Good now? Excellent. Well, we're here today for a really special and important announcement about protecting one of our most important native animals. This is really important work, and I want to congratulate Minister Leanne Enoch and all of her stakeholders for working together to deliver this koala plan. But before we do that, please allow me to do a COVID-19 update for Queensland. We are reporting today 4 additional cases of COVID-19, all related to the known outbreak at the Waco Correctional Training Academy. Some of these cases have been reported in the media during the previous 24 hours, and so I'll go through them in a moment. As I say, some have been publicly reported but not publicly notified by us or Queensland Health at this stage. So those 4 additional cases mean we now have 24 that are active, most in the southeast, the largest number in Metro South and West Moreton. We have now had a total of 1,117 cases. 18 of those remain in our hospitals, and as I say, mostly in the southeast. We had another fantastic testing period, and I really want to thank Queenslanders and our scientific and laboratory staff. They processed 18,763 samples to find those 4 positive tests, which is a really promising result. So the 4 new cases, a case of a man from Greenbank who was another trainee at the Correctional Training Academy, a 30 to 39-year-old female from Forest Lake who is the wife of another of those trainees who was previously reported, a 30 to 39-year-old woman who is the wife of one of the Pimpamar cases, also previously reported, and a 60 to 69-year-old female, again the wife of a case previously reported. She lives in Forest Lake. As you can see, 3 of these 4 cases relate to household transmission, and we've always said all along that households are one of the highest risk of transmission locations. Very hard to quarantine in a household. It underlines how important it is that we have restricted the number of people in households. That will greatly minimise the risk of widespread transmission in the community in households. It also underlines why it was so important that we brought in hotel quarantine. We brought in hotel quarantine when we were seeing people returning to the state and then giving the virus to other people in their household, their wife, their husband, their children, other family members. And so it is hotel quarantine that has helped us limit that household spread. It's also household spread is also what we know was a key driver of the early cases in that second wave in Victoria. On that note, let me say how fantastic it is to see Victoria's case numbers decreasing. For the first time, they're reporting less than 100 cases in a day, the first time for a significant period of time, and that represents that they are having gradual success at getting on top of that second wave. I congratulate them and continue to offer whatever support we can provide. You will have seen in the public health alerts that were provided yesterday that there were 2 locations where people known to have been infectious visited in the Toowoomba region. And so for that reason, we are today advising people who live in the Darling Downs Hospital and Health Service districts that we will be expanding the restrictions currently in place in Metro North, Metro South, West Moreton and the Gold Coast to the Darling Downs HHS region. That will be effective from 8 a.m. Monday, and all of the same restrictions will apply. So from 8 a.m. Monday, people in those local government areas will be limited to 10 people at gatherings in non-COVID safe venues. COVID safe venues, businesses, cafes, restaurants, pubs, they can continue to operate as normal, but we are limiting the number of people who can be at a non-COVID safe event to 10. We will also be applying the restrictions in aged care, in disability accommodation and in hospitals from 8 a.m. on Monday. That means people can go about their visits to loved ones in aged care facilities in the Darling Downs region tomorrow, but they will be restricted from Monday onwards. We are dispatching additional protective equipment to our hospitals in the Darling Downs region today to ensure that they have those masks and gloves, everything that they need to keep themselves safe. You'll also have seen in those public health alerts that there is an important alert related to the Graceville Netball Centre. We know that last weekend there were people there who may have been infectious and that a lot of people go there. I understand they have 20 or more matches a day, that it is a busy netball centre, that people congregate around the canteen. It is closed today. The matches that were due to be there today have been suspended to keep people safe. But I want to use it as an opportunity to remind everybody who is at community sport this weekend that it's incredibly important that you comply with the COVID safe plan for your sport. Check in with those QR codes. Keep your distance between household groupings. That's incredibly important, and it's important not just while spectating, but also while congregating around canteens and toilets, entry and exit points, that kind of thing. That's the extent of the update from me. I'm happy to take questions.
Is it possible restrictions will change around community sport, or it's too early at this stage?
It's too early at this stage, and I'd emphasise that we are not reporting infections from the netball centre. We are, though, reporting that people believed to be infectious were there in a location where many hundreds of people gather, and so it's a cause for concern, of course. That's why we've issued that notice. That's why we have notified teams and coaches, players, families. But it's a chance to underline just how important it is that those COVID-safe plans are complied with, no matter where you are. And community sport is somewhere a lot of people will be over this weekend, not at the Graceville Netball Centre, but at other locations, as you will have seen as you arrived here today.
Premier, what about staffing in prisons? Obviously, more cases in the local training coming out. We've seen those cases in the youth detention centre as well. What's happening with staffing? They'll obviously have staff going into isolation, I imagine. How are you managing those numbers?
Yeah, there will be a lot of staff going into quarantine. Commissioner Martin is here and is able to speak to the operational matters. Did you want me to get him now, or do you want me to finish taking questions and then go back to it? Yeah, okay.
Beautiful weather this weekend. There's heaps of people out on the roads, out and about. Are you worried that people will be complacent and those gatherings in those restricted areas will be more intense?
Yeah, we are worried about that. It's relatively recent that we introduced these new restrictions. They only came into effect today on the Gold Coast. And so we're really trying to get the message out there. And thank you very much to the media for assisting us to get the message out there that this weekend there is COVID in our community. We know there are confirmed cases. There are many days over the previous fortnight where we know people have been in the community while infectious. That makes this an incredibly dangerous time. This weekend, an incredibly dangerous time. And so we would urge everyone to do what we've been doing. We've been doing this all year now. I think people know what the restrictions are. They know how to keep themselves safe. And we just underline that while there was a period of time there, a long period of time, where perhaps we could let our guard down because there wasn't virus in the community, we know that now there has been virus in the community, and that should change things.
Just on that tragic case of that baby, there's been a lot of reporting around that. Can you confirm, did the New South Wales Hospital, Lismore Hospital, make any contact with Queensland authorities to check if that family could come to Queensland?
Look, I want to say a few things about this case because a lot has been said about it. First of all, can I say that this last 24 hours, watching politicians use this tragic event to further their political arguments, it's left me feeling sick. What Deb Frecklington said yesterday was disgusting. It's unbecoming even of her. Our emergency services do their very, very best every day to save lives. The border direction is very clear. It does not apply to people seeking emergency health care or those accompanying people needing emergency health care. Now, I will write today to the New South Wales Health Minister and I will ask him to notify all of the hospitals in New South Wales to ensure that they are aware of these arrangements. I have spoken to the Chief Executive of the Mater Hospital, where it is claimed that this occurred, and he has assured me that they have no records of the kinds of claims that have been made, and he has assured me that he will ensure that everyone within his health service is aware. But I want to emphasise that our hospitals and our aeromedical evacuation services save lives every single day, and there are no borders that restrict them saving those lives, and they will continue to do so. Of course, this is a very tragic but also a private matter that there are limits to which I can disclose information about, and I respect those things. You all know that I never have and never will disclose private patient information, but I can assure you that we are doing everything that we can to ensure that everyone is aware these border restrictions do not limit the movement of patients requiring urgent or essential care.
Why are you
There's
only
obviously some
writing?
confusion there though, because if you have to write to New South Wales Health about that, and obviously the Lismore Hospital didn't know whether they could send someone across the border, so do you concede there is confusion there to an extent?
Oh, look, I can't speak for hospitals in New South Wales. All I can do is tell you that our hospitals, our clinicians, our evacuation services know that the border restrictions do not apply. And so if there is a communication problem south of the border, I want to fix it. And I will do that by writing to the New South Wales Minister and asking him to convey that to those hospitals.
Do you think the Premier's comments about Queensland hospitals and Queenslanders have confused people in recent weeks?
Look, I think that it's unfortunate that these kind of tragic events are being used by some to further their political arguments. Nobody can show me any evidence whatsoever that a different outcome here in terms of the location of transfer would have changed in any material way the very, very tragic outcome. We have fantastic hospitals here in Queensland, and I think the Premier was trying to emphasise that, but they're very, very good hospitals in New South Wales too. The RPA is a fantastic hospital, and if a life can be saved anywhere, it can be saved at the RPA just as well as it would have been at the Mater, also a fantastic hospital.
Why wasn't this foreseen? Why didn't Queensland Health proactively speak to the hospitals in New South Wales and the health service there? Because it's obvious that something like this could have happened.
Well, I think we've been very clear from the beginning. Look, I can read to you the direction. The direction says it does not apply if the person is entering Queensland to obtain essential health care or as a support person of a person obtaining essential health care. Now, I don't think you can be clearer than that. If some people in hospitals in other states have misinterpreted it, well, that's a shame, and we will do our best to correct that. But at no time have we not have we attempted to apply the border restrictions on people requiring emergency care, and we never will.
Does there need to be a national definition of a hotspot, which the Prime Minister wants?
Look, I've seen those comments from the Prime Minister. I don't think they'd be particularly useful. I think states are managing the health response here, and states need to continue to be able to manage their health response based on what's going on in their particular states. Frankly, Scott Morrison should spend a bit more time on the things he's responsible for, like international borders, like aged care, like supporting the Victorian government in their response, and a bit less time lecturing those states that so far have done a very good job of keeping on top of COVID and are doing their very, very best to keep their communities safe in an ongoing way.
How many cases are now connected to this training centre?
So across the Youth Detention Centre and the Training Centre, we're reporting 19 cases. Commissioner Martin will be able to tell you how many of those relate to the Training Centre.
Can anything further be done in terms of the genome testing or getting to the bottom of?
No, unfortunately, that's the extent of the usefulness of that genomic testing. It identified a very common strain of COVID-19, meaning it doesn't answer the questions we'd hoped it would. That remains a mystery whether there was a link between the Melbourne Logan cluster, the Brisbane Youth Detention Centre cluster, and now the Corrections Training Academy cluster. We would very much like to link those three together. If we do, it will be by identifying cases in between or through our contact tracing, our interviews with those individuals.
With School Leavers Week activities cancelled, do you think school leavers will comply with restrictions, and what kind of expectations do you have for the class of 2020?
Look, I really think they will. This is a real shame for the class of 2020. Their Year 12 has been greatly affected by COVID, but I think it means they're also more aware than probably anyone about what the restrictions are and how it applies to them. I hope that they do find ways to celebrate what's an incredibly important milestone. Finishing Year 12 is an incredibly important milestone, and I hope they find ways to do that with their closest group of friends so that they can do it in a safe way and in compliance with the restrictions. Of course, police will be enforcing those restrictions, not just on the Gold Coast but throughout the state, and so that threat remains, that it may be enforced, but I would expect, just as we have seen throughout this entire thing, that Queenslanders, no matter what their age, they do the right thing.
As there is change, people with exemptions for compassionate brands are still being turned around at the border. Will today's announcement make things easier for people from New South Wales trying to say goodbye to terminally ill loved ones in Queensland?
I'm not. What are you referring to?
As rules are just changing,
Yes.
people with compassionate brands are still being turned around at the border. So, this I guess what's come to light in the last few days. Will this make things easier for people from New South Wales to say goodbye to terminally ill patients in Queensland?
No, they'll still require exemptions to do that, and each of those is considered on their merits personally by Dr. Jeanette Young, the Chief Health Officer. Where it can be safely facilitated, it will be, and our hospitals have protocols in place to allow that, infection control spaces, protective equipment, that kind of thing. But it's important to remember that these initiatives are all put in place to keep our community safe. Yeah, sure.
Are you able to confirm the number of cases now connected to the training facility?
Sure. Happy to do that. So Peter Martin is my name. I'm the Commissioner of Queensland Corrective Services. So at the moment I can confirm that we have 5 positive cases linked to the QCS Academy. And there is a direct link to the Brisbane Youth Detention Centre, having regard for the proximity of the area, the Youth Detention Centre, to the Wacol site. Of those 5 staff, we have a trainer that initially tested positive, and we have 2 recruits. There is also 2 additional staff that come from the Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre that happen to be part of a team of 14 officers that undertook training at the academy. So 2 out of the 14 have tested positive. That has now led us to launch inquiries in consort with Queensland Health at Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre. Now, Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre is a very large and complex correctional centre. Its business is primarily remand-related prison work. There are 1,060 prisoners on that site, and there are 530 employees. Today and tomorrow is a concerted effort in consort with our colleagues at Queensland Health to test those officers on site. And of the prison population, we've identified a group that is more at risk than others, 170 or so prisoners, and that's our early work to test those prisoners. All of that work, we're hopeful, will be resolved by end of this weekend. And in the first hour of opening the testing clinic this morning, at 10 a.m, we tested some 45 or so officers. So work is progressing really fervently in that direction, and our hope is to have all of that work done by the end of this weekend.
How long will those lockdowns in the prisons last?
So the prisons are currently at stage 4 from Rockhampton, including Rockhampton South. That encompasses 14 prisons. The prisons that aren't in scope at the present time are Townsville Correctional Centre and also Lotus Glen Correctional Centre. So of the 14 prisons, including those at the Wacol site, since early last week, they have been at stage 4 lockdown, which is fairly significantly onerous in terms of the staff and also the prisoners, particularly in terms of movement. So the prisoners have been locked in their cell, and regrettably that is a terrible situation. It is certainly not what I would want to do, but under the current advice from Queensland Health, that is the only option that we have to keep the prison population and the staff safe at those locations. And stage 4 restrictions will be in place until the Chief Health Officer advises me that it's safe to alleviate that stage 4 restriction.
So how long have prisoners been locked in their cells for? Have they been out at all?
The prisoners will be locked in their cell. They will have medications in their cell as needed. They will have food in their cell, but they will not be able to leave their cells over this particular period, because you just can't, in the built environment the way that it is, move prisoners out of those cells for any length of time without the risk of cross-contamination. It's just not possible. There are currently 9,000 prisoners in Queensland. Of the 14 prisons that are currently impacted by stage 4 restrictions, bearing in mind that Townsville and Lotus Glen aren't, there are 7,000 prisoners impacted out of a population of 9,000.
Are you expecting an increase in incidents if they're locked in their cells and not able to get out?
Look, it's a very real issue, and certainly the level of aggression, the temperature, the prisoner population so far has been really compliant. We're working really hard in terms of our messaging. Our staff have done a great job to get the messages out to the prisoners and the prisoners' family. This is the last thing that we would want to do, but they've been quite tolerant because they know we're doing this to ultimately keep them safe.
Do you know how many of them have been kept in watch houses?
I'm sorry, watch house operations are not the business of Queensland Corrective Services. That's a matter for the QPS Commissioner. But there would be prisoners that would be kept in the watch house who would not be released to come into a corrective services facility because of the risk of our prisoner population and the risk of the staffing group. And also, it's really important to recognise that any people that leave a correctional centre under stage 4 and when they return to the prison also are subject to those further isolation provisions as part of the current arrangements. My great hope is that this is short-lived, that we can reverse this current situation. It's certainly not what I would want to do, but at the moment I have a lack of other options.
So how many
Talk about
days?
staffing in terms of moving staff around. I mean, you've obviously got a number of staff in isolation, the possibility that more will have to go into isolation, possibly more will get sick. How are you, I guess, dividing the staff members up? Do you have to bring staff from other prisons to Waco?
That's a really good point, and the reality is that this is a very, very difficult and challenging environment to manage those 9,000 prisoners, and also we've got 20,000 offenders that we manage in the broader community. So managing the workforce, bearing in mind that we also need to make sure, to the degree that is possible, we don't facilitate cross-contamination from one centre to another centre, but managing the workforce, a workforce of 6,500, and a sizable amount of that workforce are devoted to the work of the prison operations, and it's a very significant challenge, but we've always got plan B and plan C within the context that if we have to isolate a sizable proportion of our workforce, that we have a range of contingencies in place.
What are those contingencies? Are you bringing staff on a more permanent basis from, say, prisons in Townsville down to Brisbane or vice versa?
Yeah, we have to be very careful of moving our officers around from prison to prison, having regard for the issue of cross-contamination, and everything that we do operationally is guided by the best advice of the Chief Health Officer in Queensland Health. But we have a range of options, and we can use staff that are non-custodially trained, we can use staff from other centres, and if worse comes to worse, we have the full resources of the Queensland Government to bring to bear, including arrangements under the disaster management arrangements. Some of that might be other Queensland Government employees, it might be Queensland Police, or alternatively, it might be the ADF, but I can't conceive currently of a situation where those contingencies would be required. I'm confident at the moment, guided by the best advice from Queensland Health, that we will be able to use the resources.
How concerning is this situation?
This is unprecedented, unparalleled. To respond to a very difficult domain in a 1 in 100 year pandemic is very, very challenging. We've got very good plans. Our plans are mature. We've got very, very good support by Queensland Health. And our planning processes are working really effectively, and we demonstrated that last week when we were able to, in a really fast and agile way, move to stage 4 restrictions. So multiple times a day we're sense checking what we're doing with the Chief Health Officer and guided by the work of Queensland Health, and I'm really confident that we'll get through this. the same way that the rest of Queensland is getting through a very difficult and challenging time.
Just to check, are the youth detention centre in that same lockdown, like the kids are locked in their cells?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't speak about the Youth Detention Centre. That's not part of my responsibilities. So I can only talk about the adult prison population. The 9,000 prisoners currently in Queensland are my responsibility.
One more for the Deputy Premier.
That's okay.
Just one more on schoolies.
Mm.
Official booking site, schoolies.com, is still taking reservations for schoolies 2020 and has said it won't be refunding deposits paid. Should they be more accountable? Is the government working with them given the announcement?
So I only heard this morning that private company continues to take bookings and deposits. They should stop. Certainly the message to young people should be don't go ahead with bookings now, and I would urge them and all tourism providers to be very flexible in allowing young people to change their bookings in order to be able to comply with this decision. I really don't want to see any young person who will have saved hard in part-time jobs to put towards their schoolies. I don't want to see them out of pocket, and I think if organisations like this want to work with us into the future, I'd urge them to look to the future, to be responsible and to take care of their customers.
And there's a video that's been generating a bit of reaction on Twitter to do with the opposition leader, video that was done by another car manufacturing company. Have you seen it? What's your response to it?
I did see that video. I don't really know what to say about it. I think it's probably best if politicians stay away from miming gangster rap. If they are going to mime gangster rap, maybe they should check the lyrics before they do so. I certainly think songs that repeatedly use the N-word are inappropriate in Australia, in Australian politics. And so, I just think it goes to a continued pattern of poor behaviour, poor decision making from the LNP leader. I certainly don't think it's going to win her any votes.
Deputy Premier, do you think taxpayers' dollars should be spent on a feasibility study for a new coal-fired power station in Collinsville?
Well, look, that's a decision for the federal government. If they want to spend that money, that's their call. We certainly wouldn't. We've seen the feasibility of these things through the fact that we have our own coal-fired generators, we have our own energy GOCs, and so we know the economics of these things. But if the Morrison government want to do that, they should go right ahead. And it just underlines the fact that while they're focused on creating some kind of political wedge, we're focused on actually creating jobs in the resources industry, and will continue to do so. Well, look, again, that's a call for them, and that's in the scope of where they debate. They can debate with the federal government how federal funds are spent. As the Premier said, we don't have any opposition to the federal government spending that money to see if it is feasible. We continue to support our resources industry very strongly. Koalas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience as well. Well, I think it's pretty fair to say that most Queenslanders appreciate how precious and iconic koalas are in our state. But of course, over a number of decades, we've seen a decline in koala population, particularly in southeast Queensland. And of course, some of that is related to the fact that we've seen urban development. More human population has had some impacts on the koala population. And of course, what we have done as a government is move very swiftly to be able to support koala populations into the future. We established a koala expert panel that made 6 recommendations to the Palaszczuk government, and we accepted all of those, and we've been working on those since the release of those recommendations. We started work on those in terms of establishing the Koala Advisory Council, and I want to acknowledge the chair of the Koala Advisory Council who is here today, Mark Townend, who will say a few words soon. And earlier this year we released state-of-the-art mapping and regulation to be able to protect more koala habitat in southeast Queensland. And whilst I'm talking about the Koala Advisory Council, and Mark will mention some of the work very soon, I do want to pay tribute to all the members of the Koala Advisory Council. There have been representatives from the traditional owner groups, from the building industry and the timber industry, from developers, from LGAQ, who's also represented here today, and of course conservation groups, and they've all worked very hard to assist the government in the establishment of the Koala Conservation Strategy. And today, very, very pleased to be able to release the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy. It heralds the strongest protections for koalas that Queensland has ever seen. And of course it is a once in a generation opportunity to support koala populations going forward, and it is an incredibly huge amount of work that's happened to be able to get us to this point. There are 6 action areas in the Koala Conservation Strategy for South East Queensland. One is very much about habitat protection, and I can announce today, after the incredible work that's happened between the Queensland Government and local councils, including Moreton Bay Regional Council, represented here today by the Mayor, that incredible work has resulted in us being able to release now maps that see 716,226 hectares now protected as koala habitat in this state. As I said, this strategy and these mapped areas represent the strongest protections that we have ever seen in Queensland for koalas. The second area of action is around habitat restoration. So not only are we focused on protecting what we have, but also restoring habitat for those key koala areas. Threat management, of course, is another action area. We know that it's not just habitat loss that has an impact on koala populations. There's also concerns with regards to disease, car strikes, dog attacks, and that's why the strategy looks very closely at actions with regards to those threat management. Also improved mapping and monitoring, research and reporting. The maps that we now have been able to release, providing that record amount of area protected in southeast Queensland for koalas. That has been a result of an incredible amount of work with local councils to get that right. And again, I want to thank local councils right across the southeast corner, 12 councils in total, who have worked absolutely tirelessly with the government agencies to make sure that we get that mapping right. And of course, it was one of the recommendations of the Koala Expert Panel to have a coordinated, joined-up mapping process and regime, and that's exactly what we have delivered. We'll also have an action area around community engagement and also around partnership and strategic coordination. It's very clear that it is not one group that can do all of the work with regards to protecting koalas into the future. We need to be able to work together, state government, local government, developers, builders, the timber industry, conservation groups, and of course traditional owners. We all have a role to play with regards to this strategy and with regards to protecting koalas into the future. But again, today, very, very pleased to be able to release the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy, heralding the Palaszczuk government's protections for koalas, the strongest protections for koalas that Queensland has ever seen. I might hand over to the Mayor of Moreton Bay Regional Council very quickly. I know that he has been incredibly strong in his advocacy for securing as much koala habitat as possible for his council area, and I want to thank him for that work and the team and his team for that work, but I'll hand over to the Mayor very quickly.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's exciting news, not only for Moreton Bay Regional Council, but many councils in South East Queensland, with this increase in koala habitat protection mapping. In the Moreton Bay region particularly, we've had an increase now of 4,200 hectares of koala habitat mapping that has been mapped in this last version of the state government's policy. So we're very excited to see that, and we want to thank the Minister and her department for working with council and council officers in coming to this mapping improvement that we've seen through this policy. It's so important to us that with the growth predictions of some 220,000 people or 88,000 dwellings we're going to need in the next 20 years throughout our region, that this gives us now the tools that we can help protect koala habitat as we also protect and plan for the future of that growth that we need to across our region. We've also taken steps of protecting koala habitat and in case working with koalas in our Petrie PDA environment, the priority development area down at Petrie with the mill site, where we've increased the koala habitat there by 22% over the last 3 years through council investing a number of millions of dollars to work on that program with John Hanger. We also launched our environmental buyback program, which we launched this year in June, where we're looking for council to purchase environmental land that's connected to koala habitat areas that we can also try and protect. And with this mapping, it gives us the ability to do that through our planning schemes. So once again, I want to thank the Minister for working with council and coming to this conclusion of a great mapping system that we look forward to working with her in the future cases. Thank you.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. First of all, Ministers, I see a lot of bad stuff happen in 2020 we want to forget about. This is a bright star for us all, I think, because it's generational, the decisions that are being made by the government today. We're actually going to save the koala and improve the population into the future. This couldn't be done without the help of so many people, like the Minister already indicated. Particularly the Koala Council. I had 15 people of all diverse stakeholder groups get together and come with a consensus view on how we're going to improve the habitat of koalas in southeast Queensland. And not only the koalas, because once we save the koalas, we also save all the animals and all the flora and fauna underneath them. That's really important. We all talked about 1 billion animals being lost in Australia with the bushfires in the last year or so. What you've got to remember is this will add to the replenishment of that wildlife right throughout Queensland and the growth of those populations. We talked about car hits and we talked about dog attacks. That only happens because of habitat destruction. So this will help fix that, and hopefully our people in the koala rescue area won't be so busy in the coming years. So our local government was the other main player in this. Nothing will happen if just the state government make a decision and pass it down. This was a decision that involved local government very in depth. I particularly thank Greg Hallam and his association, because they worked very hard to get the 12 local governments to work together so there's no boundaries between Southeast Queensland councils. They're all joining. When they make a decision, it'll affect the region and affect the lives and habitat for those koalas in the future. So thank you very much for everyone joining together, to actually coming together to save those koalas who normally wouldn't have a voice, and the Queensland government for actually following through with the legislation and to make a difference for all of us so we can continue to live in the best state in Australia.
Where are we at with the state of koalas at the moment in Queensland?
I'd say with the bushfires we lost a few, there's no doubt about that, but particularly I think they're even. They haven't gone up a lot in the last couple of years, haven't gone down a lot. But as we know, there's a lot of growth in Queensland to happen, and in recent times, I think people realise we've seen how important all those Victorians want to move here. We've got to make room for them, and we've got to develop and keep our jobs going as well. We are going to have a huge job boost for the next couple of years here in Queensland. We need to continue to develop and milk those people, but I'm going to see those koalas increase in population.
How do the maps work? Is it 577,000 hectares? Is that now like koala protected?
Locked up.
Yeah.
Locked up. Now there is always, like anything, and like the health ministers have to deal with exemptions, there will be exemptions in certain areas for important infrastructure, but in the majority, those will be saved today. They weren't saved yesterday. Those areas are saved today.
And the 10,000 hectares that is being restored, do you know where that is? Like, is it sort of local forest that we know?
I think you'll find it in local areas such as Logan and a little bit in Moreton, but particularly areas that have come under pressure in the last few years, and there's been contributions taken from developers, and the state government's put money aside. It will go back into developing those areas, in developing the habitat in those areas.
We just might hear from Greg from the
Yeah.
LGAQ, if that's okay, and then we'll take some questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great day. We welcome the announcement by the Queensland Government. We welcome the fact the ministers work cooperatively with councils. And to that extent, this last part of the process, where councils looked and refined those maps, I'm proud to say 24,500 hectares was added through that process, through council input and that fine detail that we worked through. So it shows you the partnership was good and strong, that it works. We need to cooperate going forward, but clearly there is really now a blueprint for all of us to follow, and that's a good thing. Thank you.
Can I ask how many hectares
24,000.
How many were you asking for initially?
Well, we didn't have a set number. We simply received the plans. As the Minister will know, this has been an iterative process. We've probably been through this 2 or 3 times. I think we've sat down together at least 3 times this year, even with COVID, to talk about the issues. So in terms of the final plan that we were given, and we were given the chance for some months to refine those, we added 24,500 at that point. So we're largely satisfied that what we've got now is a very good start and will protect koalas.
What more were you hoping for?
Look, I think most of our needs have been satisfied, to be honest. Just the government have cooperated, we've been sensible, as the Mayor said, and the head of the Koala Council. We've got to work around the realities of South East Queensland growing, but be smart about it. So I think that's what's happened. People have applied intelligence, they've come together, they've worked together across the political spectrum, across levels of government, and indeed with the development community, to try to come up with the best workable plan we could find.
From a local government point of view, does this sort of mean that I guess these areas now that are protected in the new strategy can't be developed on, for example?
That's well, locked up means locked up, yep. So we've now quarantined those areas into the future to make sure that koalas have the habitat to live and survive.
Thank you. I might just clarify as well that in terms of the koala habitat that's protected, there's 3 categories in that in the habitat protected. So one is priority areas, koala priority areas, which are absolutely where we see prohibited clearing, and that means that only by exemption would we see clearing in those koala priority areas. The second area is koala habitat or core habitat. That does allow for some offsetting and minimisation and mitigation. And of course, the work that we've been doing extensively with councils is around the local area refined habitat maps. And that has been a fantastic result where we're seeing the next couple of years being able to work even more closely with councils to get that right. Now, just to put this into perspective, as I understand it, the now more than 700,000 hectares that's delegated as koala habitat, that is 5 times the amount of protection that area protected that we've seen from previously under state government protections. And one of the very clear recommendations of the Koala Expert Panel was that we needed a joined up, seamless regime with regards to mapping. So that it wasn't just some protections from state, some protections from council. We needed to see something that joined up. And that's what we've delivered here together in a really sensible way and in a way that's going to protect koalas into the future. Can I also announce that today I'm also announcing $1.4 million worth of funding from the Community Sustainability Action Grants for koala applied research, so practical applied research that's going to help with koala populations going forward. So very pleased to be able to announce that $1.4 million worth of grants today, grants of up to $100,000 to support projects of applied practical research to support koala populations into the future with regards to South East Queensland. Any further questions?
Minister, I guess, do you know how many koalas are in the population and what our projected, like where we want to go, what we're aiming for?
So of course that's always a very difficult number to grasp. But what we have seen, there was a report that was done some years ago now, actually under the leadership of Minister Miles, that gave us an indication of the rapid decline of koalas in South East Queensland. In fact, in some locations, they were estimating an 80% decline of koala populations. And what we want to see now, of course, and we know that if we protect habitat, we stand the best chance possible of being able to protect koalas and their populations into the future. And of course, we want to see those numbers grow as we see those areas protected in such a strong way.
The style of this plan has been criticised by some groups because it doesn't have localised pockets, or it moves away from that. I guess you're still happy with, you've released it despite their criticism along the way of the draft?
Well, look, I think as I started, it's pretty fair to say that every Queenslander, or most Queenslanders, know how precious and iconic the koala is. And of course, it is a very passionate subject for many people. We have relied on the best scientific evidence and, of course, the state-of-the-art mapping tools to be able to produce these maps. As I said, the strongest protections that Queensland has ever seen, and in fact an increase in the amount of area protected for koalas. And that science takes into account a whole heap of things, from soil condition to the kind of the actual kind of habitat, the connectivity of that habitat, and all of those factors that we know support koala populations into the future. And we've been able to do that in a way that balances with, as Mark said, the need to continue to manage development in the southeast corner of Queensland. We know that we will continue to support jobs in Queensland, particularly post-COVID, and that's why this strategy, the strongest protections Queensland has ever seen, is also a very strong balance in terms of ensuring that jobs and development are well managed.
So the 10,000 hectares being restored, how do you restore koala habitat, and has that already begun?
So restoration and rehabilitation is something that we're seeing right across Queensland. And in fact, the work that's been happening in our pilot projects with regards to the Land Restoration Fund, for instance, is already starting some of that work. The work that we've been doing with farmers along the Great Barrier Reef catchment areas, where we see rehabilitation happening in particular locations, and with conservation groups and land management groups. Restoration and rehabilitation is something that we're already well rehearsed at in Queensland. So to be able to apply that to koala habitat is something that I think is a very exciting part of the strategy. The target is to see 10,000 hectares in southeast Queensland restored or rehabilitated. And of course we'll work with some of those key experts to be able to get that result for Queensland and for the fantastic and the beautiful Queensland koala population.
Where are we at with our plastic ban? So what can you tell us about that? Are we going to add styrofoam cups and containers to the plastic ban?
Well, I'm very excited to see the committee's report yesterday to fully endorse the legislation with regards to single-use plastics legislation in this state. Of course, it was only released yesterday, and the government will now begin its work on its response to that report. But what I can say is that we have been absolutely working very hard with regards to reducing single-use plastic pollution in this state. The ban of single-use lightweight plastic shopping bags, through to our incredibly successful container refund scheme, where we've seen over 2 billion containers returned in just over a year and a half of the scheme. And now with the introduction of this groundbreaking legislation to ban further single-use plastics from our environment, I'm very pleased to see the committee support the passing of that legislation. In fact, great to see that there's not even a dissenting report from the LNP. It's very rare that the LNP support anything that has anything to do with the environment. So that's very pleasing to see as well. And I am also excited to see the committee look at other things that they want to see included as part of the legislation going forward. And that's why, of course, we have introduced the legislation with a head of power to be able to add other components as further work is done.
So is there a date where those items will be banned from? Is it July next year?
Well, of course, it has to go back into Parliament and be passed as legislation, and there's a lot of work to be done between now and that point. And we have flagged in the introduction of the legislation that we would look to July next year, but of course we have to keep in mind any potential restrictions that might come about from COVID-19, but certainly flagging that we're looking at July next year. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
And I think we're going to